The following morning I woke with a guilt hangover, to add to my alcohol hangover and sleepless night exhaustion. Katie showed no sign of stirring, so, although I was probably still over the limit, I drove to a 24-hour clinic in a distant part of the city where I stood for half an hour, finally obtaining the morning after pills I desperately needed. When I returned home, Katie was still asleep. I lay on my bed, bewildered. The flowers arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was asleep, so tired that not even guilt could keep me awake. I had popped 2 of the pills, was hoping they would be doing their much-needed job and wondering if I would feel them doing it. The doorbell woke me up. I ignored it, expecting it to be one of Katie's friends. It rang again. I ignored it again. When it rang a third time, I realized Katie must have gone out while I had been asleep, so I tottered downstairs to find a smiling young woman on the doorstep with a large bouquet of flowers. There was no card, but as I took them into the kitchen, a text message arrived on my phone. I thought a card would be too risky, but wanted to let you know how important last night was to me. You are a very special woman. Thank you. Neil X. I should have either ignored the message or replied saying that it had been a terrible mistake which we must both try and forget had ever happened. Even now, I cannot fully explain why I did neither of these. I didn't throw the flowers into the dustbin either. Instead, I trimmed them, placed them carefully in a vase, then sat looking at them with a mug of coffee in my hand, thinking. My hangover had greatly reduced and the hour's sleep had gone some way towards restoring my composure, but even then I can't have been thinking clearly because I picked up my phone and began to type. The flowers are lovely, but you shouldn't have sent them. The response was almost instant. Mel. I'm so glad you replied. I thought you might not talk to me. I shouldn't talk to you. We shouldn't have done it, Neil. I don't know what came over me. Neil's message ran. I'm really sorry. Something in that message stirred something within me, perhaps it was anger, perhaps something deeper, but there was fire in my fingers as I typed. Are you sorry, Neil? What do you mean? Simple question. Are you really sorry? Where the F word came from I have no idea. Until then I had been rather prudish in my vocabulary. There was a long delay before my phone beeped again. No, Mel. I'm not sorry at all. In fact, I'm pleased. The words stunned me. I stared at the screen in a combination of disbelief and guilty delight but could not think what to reply. In the end, Neil must have got fed up waiting because he sent another message. Are you still there? I'm still here. There was another pause before my phone beeped. I've wanted love you for years. Ever since I met you. The words burned into my mind as I stared at the screen in astonishment. Are you sorry it happened, Mel? Came the next message. How did I feel? I certainly felt guilty, but somehow, not sorry. What was more, I felt unexpectedly aroused. I felt attractive again. Had Neil forced me? I couldn't even pretend that he had. Although Neil had given me little choice in the matter, I hadn't really resisted. I hadn't screamed. In truth, I had actually enjoyed them. And it had felt so very, very good, uncontrolled way. I took a deep breath, then made the second biggest mistake of my life. I'm pleased it happened too, I typed slowly and carefully. My heart was thumping as I saw the words appear on my screen and knew they had just appeared on his. Thank God. When can I see you again? My fingers seemed to be typing on their own as unfamiliar, powerful emotions surged through me. Tomorrow night. You're alone? Katie's staying with friends. You really mean it, Mel? Let's be very clear, you want again? The words were so hard to type I almost gave up, but in the end I sent the message that was ultimately to destroy the trust in my marriage and leave me where I am today. Yes, Neil. I want again. Neil came round the following evening dressed in his tennis clothes. He had told his wife Allison that he had a league match to play but instead came straight to see me. Within 10 minutes of arriving, he had bent me over the kitchen table. This was no drunken, accidental mistake. This was a deliberate, sober decision to have infidelity with another man. The first, pivotal act of infidelity out of the way, we could take our time about the second. This took place in the guest bedroom with the curtains open. I went back on the pill the very next day, hiding them in the depths of my sponge bag in the bathroom where I knew Chris would never look. That was how the first and I hope, only affair in my married life started. For the first 2 weeks, Neil and I met almost every day, snatching opportunities in my house when Katie was out, his wife's presence. Things slowed down when my older daughter Hannah returned from university for the summer. With both her and Katie around, the risk of being caught was high, but, with only 1 or 2 near misses, we managed. Chris insisted that I include details of my affair. During those early weeks, Neil and I met far too often, so here are a couple that stick in my mind. On Wednesday, July 12th at 6:45 in the evening, Neil and me in his empty office suite. At 7:30 in the morning of Tuesday, July 18th, Neil and me in the back of my SUV in the country park. In the evening of Friday, July 21st, my husband came home from the Middle East. Neil and I spent 2 full hours in our guest room before I left to collect Chris from the airport. We had been so into each other that we lost track of time and I had to leave in a hurry straight afterwards. I hoped that Chris wouldn't notice something on me. I'm sorry if this upsets you, Chris, but you made me promise, and this is the truth. The next 3 weeks were difficult. With my husband and both daughters at home, the best Neil and I could manage was 1 assignation each week, with maybe a second if we were lucky. Most were in the back of my SUV, parked in a variety of inconspicuous places within a 10-mile radius of our house. The 2-week family holiday that followed would normally have been something to look forward to, a large, luxurious villa in Spain with its own pool, set only a short walk from the sea. We had been there half a dozen times before and knew the area well. This time Hannah had wanted to bring her boyfriend too. Chris and I were okay about it, but Katie had gone on and on about being a third wheel, so the idea had been vetoed and there was more than a little tension in the air even without my secret. The holiday passed quite well though. As it happened, Katie met a boy who came from a town near ours on the second night. The rest of us were forced to endure their holiday romance, Hannah nursing a grievance throughout the whole fortnight. Chris and I rekindled our love life to some extent, but my expectations had been unrealistically altered. I'm sorry, Chris. I know I was useless. You are a good lover. When the holiday was over, I could hardly wait for the affair to begin again. I did not have to wait long. Chris returned to the Middle East for a short visit on September 2nd, but although he was away, the kids were still at home, so there was still the constant risk of my affair being discovered by one of them or Neil's wife. Until the university term started again, we agreed to see each other only a couple of times each week and then only on neutral territory like a hotel room or his office once everyone else had gone home. It was passionate and exciting, but not the relationship I wanted. September 9th finally arrived, the day the kids went back to university, or on the case of my youngest, went away for the first time. Chris had returned in time to see them off, and for the following 2 weeks he and I were a couple again. It could and I am so glad I did. After that, there were too many things to describe them all, but as my husband insists I let everyone know the kind of woman I really am, I will include the most outrageous, most daring, and most exciting. On Thursday, October 3rd, I played tennis in the afternoon with one of my friends, then went straight to the Waitrose supermarket in Newark, about 40 minutes. Neil met me on a quiet lane near a local country park on my way home. I was already highly aroused. On Sunday, October 8th, in our room. His wife believed him to be on the golf course. We did it again on the evening of Tuesday, 10th, an hour after you and I had spoken on the phone. We did it one last time at 7 in the morning on Friday, October 13th, in the guest room our house. He had told Allison he was in London for a meeting. I really wish you and I had discovered it together rather than me discovering it during my only period of infidelity, but no matter how I wish otherwise, I can't change history. It's the deepest secret to come out of my affair. If you can read this and still respect me, we still have a chance together. Our world came to an abrupt end on Monday, October 16, 2017. My husband's flight was due into Heathrow Airport at 8 o'clock that evening. As usual, I had planned to drive down late that afternoon to pick him up. Chris had told me it wasn't necessary, that he could easily get a taxi, but, possibly driven by guilt, I had insisted on going to collect him. That guilt hadn't been strong enough to prevent me inviting Neil for one last, lingering fuck in our house before my husband returned and our period of complete freedom came to an end. To reach the airport by 8 o'clock I needed to leave home by 5:30. If Neil arrived around 2 and had left by 4 o'clock, that would give us a full 2 hours together. After that I would have 90 minutes to wash away any gooey traces of infidelity, for me to do any tidying that was needed. In fact, Neil arrived at 1 o'clock, apparently unable to wait any longer. I was a little wrong-footed and completely unready when he arrived early, but was determined to give him the full benefit of my new purchases. Neil left the house at 4 o'clock. We had spent 3 whole hours together, but nearly an hour of that had been spent talking. We kissed slowly before I let him out into the afternoon sunshine. Alone in the house I realized I had more work to do than I had originally planned. There was still time to get it all sorted and meet my husband's plane if I got a move on. Rushing upstairs I opened all the windows to let the air clear, then began to strip the bed. The sheets and duvet cover really were messy, no way must my husband see them, so I carried them down to the utility room, shoved them straight in the washing machine, then started the program. Going back upstairs, I went to the linen cupboard to get new bedding. To my relief, there was enough there, but the duvet fought back hard and it took a good 15 minutes to get the bed looking clean and neat again. I breathed a sigh of relief, went into the ensuite and began to fill the tub with water and a goodly dose of bath foam. Then I heard the front door opening downstairs. Oh my God! It was on a latch and could only be opened with a key. Only Chris, the girls, and I had keys. The girls were in university, so. Oh Jesus! Chris must be home early. I pulled my robe back on in a hurry, ran through the bedroom to the landing and looked down into the hall. A single suitcase stood in the center of the floor, Chris' suitcase. The front door was open, he must be at the taxi, getting another piece of baggage. I ran back into the bedroom and quickly pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, then ran my fingers through my hair and, my heart thumping loud enough to wake the dead, went down the stairs as casually as I could manage to greet my husband as normally as I could. As my bare feet reached the wooden floor, Chris came through the front door, placed a second bag alongside the first, then looked up at me. His body language was strange, but I was feeling too flustered and guilty to notice. "Chris!" I exclaimed. "What are you doing here?" "I live here," he replied. "But your flight isn't due for hours." "I caught an earlier one," he told me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I protested. "I could have picked you up earlier." "Could you?" he asked quietly. "You weren't too busy?" "What do you mean?" "I thought you might be occupied, so I made my own way home." The twinkle in his eye that usually accompanied our first meeting on his return was not there. He did not come over to hug me or kiss me, and, when I moved towards him, he backed away. I did not notice the ominous atmosphere that was developing. "Can I get you anything?" I asked. "Haven't you given me enough?" Chris replied in an unpleasant voice. "Sorry?" I asked, beginning to realize that something really was amiss. Chris did not answer directly. Instead, he looked at me with a hard expression on his face. "I didn't want you to pick me up," he said slowly. "Why not?" "I would have been happy to do it." "Would you?" "I would have thought you'd be too busy." I frowned, puzzled. "Anyway, I didn't want you to," he went on. "I wanted you to be here when I got back. I wanted to surprise you." The words could have been cheerful and romantic, but for some reason sounded threatening. "I thought I might catch you by surprise?" "You've certainly done that, but why are you being so cold?" Chris took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. 2 days ago, I went to see the sight doctor," he said ominously. "I wasn't feeling great. I was uncomfortable. Something was wrong," I was concerned. He laughed hollowly. It turns out I was right to be. Why didn't you tell me? I asked anxiously. Are you ill? Are you all right? No, Mel, I'm not all right, but I'll be better in a few weeks if I take these. He slowly placed a small cardboard box on the hall table. I picked it up, quickly recognizing the contents as antibiotics. What's the matter? Is it serious? Tell me. I demanded. Oh, it's serious all right, he said with a false laugh, his voice so cold and emotionless I could hardly believe it was my husband talking. What is it? I was getting angry now. Tell me, Chris. Okay, he said. It's simple, Mel. I have acquired a transmitted disease. He was speaking as if explaining an easy maths homework problem to one of the kids for the 10th time. What? I gasped in disbelief. I'll put it another way for you. I've got VD. I've got the clap. Oh my God. And there is only one person I could possibly have got it from. It took a moment for the meaning of his words to sink in. Me? I gasped. Yes. You, Mel. There is no one else in the world I could have caught it from. A cold fear passed over and through me as he continued. You didn't give it to yourself, so the only possible conclusion is that you've been with someone else, someone who's infected. I stood open-mouthed. You need to start talking, Melanie. The shock of my infidelity being found out in this brutal way was like a hard physical blow. My mind was spinning. Had I really heard those words? Could they really be true? I felt sick. If I was infected, then it could only have come from Neil. I had thought I was his only lover apart from his wife, but why should I have been? If a man was happy to cheat on his wife, then why had I imagined he would stick at one lover? Had I really been that blind or conceited? In a perverse way, I began to feel as if I had been betrayed as much as I had betrayed my husband. There was only one possible course of action. I began to cry. Within moments I was crying as hard as I had in my entire adult life. Confronted with such incontrovertible evidence, I had no choice but to confess everything and immediately. Through floods of tears and one trip to the toilet to be sick, I answered my husband's angry questions. Had I been having an affair? Yes, I had. Who was it with? Neil. When did it start? I told him the truth, between huge sobs. Was it still going on? Yes, but I would stop it straight away. When did he last meet me? This afternoon. When did he leave? Less than an hour ago. Chris cursed his bad luck at having just missed us in flagrante delicto. Where did you do? Here in our house. In our bed? Yes, in our bed. How often had I met him? A couple of times a week. Usually more. What kind of stupid cheating was I? I had no answer to that. I was too busy asking myself the same question. He moved towards me briefly with his hands bunched into fists. For a moment I thought he was going to hit me, but he controlled himself at the last minute and instead pressed his face close to my neck. Then he kissed me hard on the lips. I can smell him on you, he growled. Chris, please. You disgust me, Melanie. He snarled, then left the room, returning a moment later with a set of keys in his hand, then walked out of the front door. A moment after that, I heard his car roaring out of the driveway. I did not see my husband for 3 days, although he must have come home at least once because his clothes and other personal things were missing when I returned late the following afternoon. I had called Neil as soon as Chris had left the house and left multiple messages on his phone. Even so, it was late that evening before he returned the call and I was able to explain what had happened. I was worried he would come round and attack you, I told him. I've been out, he replied. But Allison's been in all day. She didn't see anyone. Maybe he's gone to his sister's. You'd better watch out. He's not stupid, Mel, Neil said, trying to reassure me. If we get into a fight, it'll get out really quickly. He won't want the world to know any more than we do. His calmness was suddenly too much for me. Why are we talking about him like this? I screamed into the phone. Don't you get it, Neil? You've infected me. How did that happen? It was a rhetorical question and we both knew it. There were only two possible answers, either his wife Allison had given it to him or he had another lover. Guess which it was. There was an element of justice in it, I suppose. If Neil was prepared to cheat on his wife with me, why should I assume I was the only girl he was cheating with? Why did I think I was special? How could I have been so stupid? Neil's visit to the doctor confirmed his condition the next day, a day in which I neither heard nor saw anything of my husband, though I called both his mobile and his sister's phone several times without reply. It was late the following day when I learned that Chris intended to stay with his sister until it was time to go back to the Middle East again. What I told the kids if they asked was up to me, but at the moment he could not contemplate living under the same roof. His voice was cold and hard. I cried myself to sleep every night until 5 days later he flew back out for his next 3-week posting. While he was away, we communicated only by email and there weren't many of those. Chris was badly hurt, feeling betrayed in many ways, all of which I could understand. I felt completely alone. I couldn't talk about this to the kids, my parents or my friends, and was now barely on speaking terms with Neil, whose marriage was falling apart too. Why was that if my affair was still secret? Neil must have exaggerated the paucity of his life at home because his wife had also become infected. In her case, however, her first action after hearing the news from her doctor was not to confront her husband as Chris had confronted me, but to go through his bank accounts and other financials in great detail. She discovered the existence of his Sheffield love nest and its youthful occupant, who it appears was not the first such girl to have benefited from his generosity. She then took the details to a particularly vicious local divorce lawyer. The first Neil knew about this was when a letter arrived from the solicitors suing for divorce and insisting that he left the marital home immediately. A year on, they have both moved away from our city to distant and separate parts of the country. He and I have not spoken since then. Many times during Chris' 3-week absence I pleaded with him to forgive me and for us to try and put our relationship back together. My repentance is genuine, though I understand this might be hard for you and him to believe. You really do only appreciate what you have when you lose it. As the time approached for Chris to return to the UK, I began to detect a softening in his hitherto complete rejection of my pleas for forgiveness. Though he insisted he would not return home, he said he would go with me to see a marriage counselor as long as I promised not to put him under pressure and to be completely honest about what had happened. Grasping this straw with both hands, I made an appointment that afternoon, and to cut a long story short, we had our first counseling session the day after he returned to the UK and his sister's house. I knew she had never liked me, which made the situation even more difficult. I could imagine what she was saying to Chris over dinner every night. Seeing the man I loved with such a look of disgust on his face when he met me at the counselor's studio reduced me to tears immediately. I could see a flash of emotion and hoped he would hold and comfort me, but he didn't. Despite this, the session was good, held partly separate, partly together. I was extremely honest about what had happened and my sincere wish to mend the damage I had caused, whatever it took. I cried throughout the entire 90 minutes. We went back to our separate houses. 2 sessions later, we agreed to have lunch together somewhere private but on neutral territory to talk things through on our own. It was an awful experience. Chris was cold and formal throughout, but at least had not yet talked to a divorce lawyer. We agreed not to tell the girls while we were trying to sort things out between us. We agreed to have lunch a second time. It was less glacial than the first, so we arranged to have dinner the following week. It was better still, though progress was slow. It took 5 more counseling sessions and 7 more meetings on neutral territory before Chris agreed to move back into our home, but not back into our bed. I was very nervous and excited when his car pulled into the driveway for the first time since he had found us out, but also very apprehensive. He slept in the spare bedroom, but at least we were under one roof again. To outward appearances, we seemed to be the same couple we used to be, but below the surface it's not true. I know we can never recover the trust we had before, but I hope and pray we can recover enough of it to bring back some of the love and life we had." The counselor, to whom I will be forever grateful, quickly identified that Chris' repeated absence as having been a major stress point in our relationship long before I cheated. She took care not to blame the affair on this or reduce my own responsibility for my actions, but said that we did need to try and keep the love side of our relationship alive while we were apart. Among other things, she suggested we tried Skype or phone. This proved to be very powerful. The publishing of this, my own story, is intended to be the ultimate example of this. Although it is being written at my husband's insistence as a penance, it is also as a vehicle by which I can confess the last few secrets about my affair that Chris doesn't yet know and which I would find very hard to tell him face to face. They might be a shock to my husband when he reads them. There is one confession in particular that I hope and pray he does not find revolting. I'm sure you can guess which. Chris, I've done what you asked now. I hope it shows you just how far I am prepared to humiliate myself to win back your respect. I know I never lost your love, that's what makes me feel so ashamed. There are no more secrets to come out. The affair was one of the most exciting periods of my life, but it wasn't real. There was nothing behind it but my own inadequacies. Now it's over, I'm ashamed of the whole thing. I have taken a risk in agreeing to have my real name and the real places used, but I trust you. If telling the truth in this way can close off that part of my life forever and allow us to start afresh, then however people think of me, it will have been a price worth paying.